Hi, this is Jamie Shadden from Missouri State University, and this is my presentation on unbundling and the myth that if you unbundle as an audiologist, you can't stay in business. And this is based on an article from Audiology Today, September and October of 2011, by Stephanie Stolbad and Barbara Winslow Warren. So basically, let's start out talking about what unbundling actually is. And the idea of unbundling is it's basically separating the cost of the hearing aid from the cost of the services that we provide as an audiologist. And here on the screen you can tell that I've kind of set up a sample bill, and it's very, very rough. But the idea here is that there's a cost that they pay you for the hearing aid, then there's a cost that they pay you per hour for the visits for the length of the hearing aid that they have it, then a price that they pay for the hearing evaluation separately, and even a price that they pay for all of the programming, for example, Real Ear. So why is this topic such a big deal? So something to consider is that both of the authors of this article are actually assistant professors and clinical coordinators at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill Hearing and Communication Center, which I'll call the UNC-HCC from now on. What that means is that this clinic is unique in the fact that it's associated with the university, but it in fact is a self-supporting clinic like many private practices. They have to pay rent, overhead, salaries, and they even really basically, a quotation that I really liked from the article was that they face the same economic challenges as clinics in the private sector. So something that they pointed out is that even the training program, they do train audiology doctoral students here, even that program is required to, even that program relies on the money that's made by the clinical services. So these are just some thoughts that we need to ponder as we go into this article. One is, why on some days do we see 15 patients but we have no revenue? And why are we often reluctant to charge patients for our expertise and time? And how should we handle the patient who purchased their hearing aids online and now brought them to us and wants us to program them? What is our time as an audiologist worth? And again, another, is there a
bill for services that will assign value to what we do as audiologists? So it's kind of taking that idea that we sell a product, the hearing, but we're also selling or providing at least our goods and services. So what are those worth? And all of these questions were ones that the UNHCCC asked themselves when they set out to start to unbundle in 2005. So they decided to pair with the American Board of Audiology on the Hearing Aid Billing Practices Survey, and this was back in January of 2011. And I just picked out a couple of graphs from the article that I thought were pretty pertinent. This one over here, figure number 2, actually shows you how long that people get services regarding their hearing aids for free from most audiologists according to this survey. And the big thing I want you to kind of notice here is that the duration of the trial period is only about 1%. So that 30 days in our clinic, only about 1% of people get to have the services for free just for that period. The largest is actually the lifetime of the hearing aid. So in other words, you've sold them a product, and then you're going to provide your services, your professional services, for free for as long as they own the hearing aid, which we know that people can keep hearing aids for up to 10 years. So you're kind of selling yourself short, is the idea put forth in the article. Figure number 1 is just showing you whether people bundle or unbundle. And the question was, does your clinic bundle services? And as you can see, 80% of the population that answered the survey, actually they do bundle their services. So that's large. Unbundling isn't a big deal, or not as big a deal as it should be, I guess I should say. So here's some more survey information. This is another graph I provided. And while it's a little wordy, what I kind of want you to take from it is that the biggest factor that people say that they don't unbundle in their own clinics is that patients will not return to the clinic for needed services. Excuse me. So the idea behind this article was that there's this big myth that if you start unbundling your hearing aid from all the services you provide as an audiologist, you actually are going to make less money and have to close your practice because people aren't going to come back using the unbundling method. They're just not going to get the things done that they need done. So the UNC-HCC decided to test this model, and I'm going to go through the steps that they went through, and some of them we're going to go through pretty quickly, but some of them I want to touch on a little bit more and do a little bit of explanation. So they wanted to test this myth. Are we going to lose patients
if we start unbundling. So in step 1, they started charging a hearing aid dispensing fee, which we actually do in our clinic, and they decided to pick just a random $200 that, from rumors, that's what they had heard was the normal fee. In step 2, they started charging for services following the warranty period, and they just picked like an hourly rate. And something that was kind of an anecdote in the article was that they had a plumber come in and he charged $80 an hour just to come in and decide what was wrong. Like, that's all he did for the diagnosis. So they kind of picked $80 an hour as their hourly rate to charge after that warranty period. So after 2 years of the loss of warranty like we do in the clinic, then you would charge people to come in and have them reprogrammed and get a new audiogram, etc. So in step 3, they started charging for that initial hearing evaluation. And basically the idea here was, what if you have someone come in and say they're interested in hearing aids, and then they don't purchase, but you've spent your time to do a complete hearing evaluation? Well, you've basically lost that time if you don't charge for it. So by unbundling and actually just charging for that, you would at least recoup your time spent. So step 4, this is kind of where they felt like unbundling really began for them. So the first thing they do is they separated the fee for services from the fee for the device. So that's kind of what we talked about at that very first slide where I kind of showed you that very, brief, very rough mock-up of a bill. Secondly, they established the value for the professional services of the audiologist. So this is kind of going back to that hourly rate, but the idea here is that you're valuing what you do as an audiologist above and beyond just being a hearing aid, like just being a salesman for hearing aids. 3, they felt like unbundling was kind of setting the stage for a successful fitting, and what they did is they started following the guidelines for the audiological management of adult hearing impairment, and those are actually established by the American Academy of Audiology. So the idea here was that I'm charging you for my services, but my services are even better than they were in the past because I'm following prescriptive formulas and science. So in step 5, they moved from just doing like a hearing evaluation to what they call the Functional Communication Assessment, the FCA. They actually had already been doing this in the clinic, but they actually labeled it and separated it at this point. This is also the time that they started charging separately for ear molds and impressions. So the person comes in, they get a hearing evaluation, they decide to buy hearing aids. Then you do the ear mold and the impression, but they never come back and actually do the hearing aid. So again, you don't want to lose that time and the materials and the non-refundable ear molds and impressions charge. Also, then they went to the prescription formula, which they did that a little bit in step 4, but they really stepped that up in step 5 to show that their value as an audiologist had again increased because they were using science prescription formulas in order to fit people with hearing aids, their patients with hearing aids. In step 6, they kind of started looking at something called the break-even point and what they called the super bill. And they recommend in the article that if you're actually going to start unbundling in your private practice, you would start at step 6. But they ended up this being their last step, and so I just wanted to follow what they did. But just keep that in mind. So what they first started doing is they went to current procedural terminology, CPT codes, or you could also use Healthcare Current Procedure Coding System, and that's the HCPCS codes. And these are kind of like what we use on the billing in the clinic downstairs. They have where we fill out the paperwork, and it has a blank spot for us to mark, and then it has a number, and then it has an explanation. They started actually doing that, and so what we do in the clinic would be what they considered a super bill. Okay, the other part of step 6 was actually finding the break-even point for their practice. So we're going to go through those steps pretty fairly quickly, but I have provided the actual graphs that they used to kind of show you what they did. So in step 1, you actually have to determine how many hours annually you can actually bill for services provided. So basically you have to figure out how many patient hours per week you make contact with patients. Then you have to figure out the number of weeks that you work per year, and then how many providers you actually have in your clinic. So if you only have one audiologist, you just figure out how many hours per week and how many weeks out of the year. Here actually they show you that they had 2 providers. They met for 30 hours a week, 48 weeks out of the year for 2 providers, so they could bill for 2,880 contact hours. Okay, once you figure that out, then you have to take your annual expenses and divide that by your annual contact hours. And what that's actually going to find you is that break-even point. It's going to show you where you're going to at least cover the costs of your rent, your utilities, your paying salaries, your receptionist, whatever it is you have billing,
you're just breaking even. You're not even making a profit. You're just breaking even. So in here, you can see their calculations. They had to charge $111.48 an hour just to break even. And if you remember when we went back before a couple of slides, they decided to charge only $80. So they weren't even breaking even before this point. So in third, then they wanted to actually find out what they needed to charge per hour in order to make a profit. So now we're not just wanting to break even and meet our expenses. We're wanting to actually turn a profit. So you're going to take your annual expenses plus that profit that you want and divide that by your annual contact hours. And that's going to give you your hourly rate. And down here, as just an example, they show that $50,000 was their desired profit. So they took the that plus the expenses for annually to run their business, divided that by the 2,880 hours, and so they needed to be charging $128.83 an hour to their patients just to make a profit, like a $50,000 profit. And again, this is just a sample. Maybe you only want to make 20, but that's something to keep in mind. So finally, kind of going back to that myth busting, is unbundling bad for business? And really, they wanted you to see that it's not. The quotation I took, it says, our move to unbundling has not only grown our patient base by 450%, but it's also increased our revenue over the past 10 years by 178%. So the myth is busted. So over here, I just kind of show you the graph so that you can see that from 2001, this is the bundled, and then you see they started the unbundling in 2005, 2006. They even went up like 64% just between unbundling and bundling. So you can even just see that jump in the change. And then by the time they reached a fully unbundled model around 2010, they're up by 178%. So definitely the myth is busted. Unbundling is actually better for business, or it was for them at least, than it was to go with a bundled model. So something I just want you to kind of take from the whole presentation is that unbundling is definitely a starting point and a way to go if you're thinking about doing private practice. Thank you very much.